Hello and welcome to Postcards from Antioch, a teaching and equipping podcast from Barton Church. I'm your host, I'm Nicole, and I am joined today by James.
Hello. Oh, that's the first time I've ever had a fanfare. Fantastic.
And what fun subject are we going to be thinking about today, James?
Well, so we've had a few episodes on the idea, sort of around the idea of sovereignty, God's sovereignty.
I remember. I learnt to play chess after the last
you go.
one.
You remember the chess analogy.
It's about it, but yeah.
Yeah.
That's everything else has gone out of my head. But.
So you and I did a sort of introductory session, looking at some of the questions, the ideas of sovereignty, different positions. So Oz and I did a session on prayer, like sovereignty and prayer. So how does God's sovereignty work with prayer? Does God respond to prayer, or are we just praying what God's told us to pray anyway? Those kind of questions, And we looked at some of the things that the Bible tells us influences prayer. So regardless of our views on sovereignty, there are some things that I think everyone agrees the Bible teaches about prayer. And today, save the well, not the best for last, but probably maybe the biggest for last, we are going to think about the issue of suffering and questions around suffering.
Okay.
And
that's quite a
God's sovereignty.
Yeah, quite a meaty topic then, really.
Yeah, it is a meaty topic, but when you think about the idea of sovereignty and suffering, probably what's the big question that people ask that links the two?
Why does God allow suffering?
Yeah, it's that simple. That's the golden question, really. That's the one that comes back. Why does suffering exist at all? If God is sovereign in terms of willing everything, why does he will suffering?
And
why does suffering exist?
And are you going to answer these questions definitively today? Because I know you, James.
I know you love.
I know you love to give an answer.
I think there are different views you can take depending on your view of sovereignty, which we'll look at. But I think we're going to, again, maybe think about some of the things the Bible teaches about suffering.
Okay.
Sort of trying to stay within the limits of what we can be confident that the Bible says. Because the different theologies. So if you remember when we last spoke, we talked about different positions, and at two extremes we had positions that I called the determinist view and the open theist view. Do you remember?
Vaguely.
Do you remember either of those?
Are you going to get me to try and?
If you can't, that's fine.
No. So the determinist view, I'm kind of going on a limb here and trying to use common sense as well as memory, but is that God determines everything?
Wow.
And the open theist would then be the opposite, that God does not determine anything.
Your deductive powers are amazing. Well, the determinist is like a shorthand term to refer to, I guess, what we'd know as the traditional conservative reform position.
That really stuck with me,
the
the idea
that Confession view that God is the first cause of everything that happens, including things.
But he does it in a way that doesn't mess with our
way that it doesn't
free will.
It doesn't
terminology.
Stop us being the second cause or something. I think that we're still responsible for our actions. Yeah. Whereas the open theist position was that God is open to change, as he's open to humanity. So God has a purpose and he's working towards that purpose, but he ensures his will by persuading and by reacting rather than by
predetermining
controlling.
Controlling.
So the determinist view would say everything's caused by God, even the bad things in our life and the suffering. God is the cause of that. The
direct cause, like he is direct.
Yes. He's the source of these things. Like and it's the key verse really for the determinist is Romans 8:28 when it thinks about that. Are you familiar with that enough to?
No.
God.
I've got nothing can separate us from the height and depth of God love.
That's the same part of the Bible.
But it's
we know that God works in all things for the good of those who love
him.
Yes. That'll do. Close enough. Romans 8:28. You can go and check whichever translation you want.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the kind of a key verse for the determinist position, is that God's doing something good. He is, he's working his good through these difficult circumstances. The open theist position is that God does not cause suffering. Suffering is caused by
sin.
Yep, which is
bad.
Yes. And who
devil,
works out
the devil,
no,
the Satan,
no,
fool.
though I will say there are plenty of theologians who argue that there is
that the
devil is a direct cause of some suffering in this world. But also, who else is there? God, the devil. Who else
us,
is? Yeah, there you go.
Us.
People.
We are sinful. We do bad
because
stuff.
God has given us free will as a part of that, and He's determined not to violate that free will.
Right. Yep.
The consequence of that is we are free to choose to inflict suffering on ourselves and others. And that is, suffering is caused by human action, free will, by God not saying no to a world in which that's possible. But can you see anything the determinist might say in response to that? Like why they might say that's worse.
I feel like I need to tell you that my brain seems to have turned to sludge. It's going to be very slow.
I'm just asking you if if you can't, that's fine, because it's not immediately obvious, I think.
Okay, good, because I can't. I'm not going to, other than point to like that verse in the Bible, the idea that God works.
That's the
good.
What they would say is that, as unpalatable as it is for us to think that God is but causing suffering, the determinist view at least says, well, but God's doing something good in it. Open theism is worse because it's saying it's pointless. It doesn't have to happen. It's God is allowing it to happen, but it doesn't have to happen. There is no, if God's
there's
behind
no redeeming feature to
if God's
the suffering.
behind it, there's a purpose behind it, we'd say. But you're saying that suffering is just a consequence of the world He's created, and that makes God even worse. So this is the kind of back and forth you can get. You're either stuck with a God who directly chooses to inflict suffering on people, it seems, or a God who has created a world where suffering occurs and does nothing. Could, but does nothing.
I can see why that's a problem. Neither of them sound brilliant, to be honest.
That's right.
So what do we do with this then?
So, well, that's a really good question, Nicole. And as you've already astutely observed, I have no answers. Of course I have no answer. If I had an answer to this discussion, would I be here? Or would I be in the Bahamas, living off the proceeds of my book that I've written that solves this problem? So you have this dilemma. For example, the idea that even if God wills suffering for some unknowable purpose, you have to hold that in tension with the biblical verses that say that, these things are bad. The things that cause suffering are bad, like murdering people is bad, for example. So you've got to hold all these things in tension.
Can I ask a question?
You can ask a question.
It's not going to derail the conversation. It's on topic, I think. Can you be somewhere between the two, like open theist and determinist?
Yeah, I think
and also, like, can you see that? Could you, for example, say God wills all the good because He is He predetermines the good, but He doesn't predetermine the bad? Like, is that a distinction that's made?
Yeah, it's possible. I'm not sure if someone's made that argument, but I wouldn't be surprised if someone has.
Sounds.
Yeah. Otherwise, you could do it, Nicole.
I'll be in the Bahamas too with my book.
Yeah, but so as in your first question, yes, absolutely. When we had that first session, we sort of talked about it as the idea of a scale, and we fall in various. Like as I said, there are people who look at aspects of open theism and say, yeah, that makes sense, but I don't agree with aspects of it, such as that God doesn't know the future. That's one of the. And other people who say, who would say they describe themselves as conservative reformed, but would say, well, I hold a different position on the idea that God causes suffering. I think there's something else going on. So I think, yeah, absolutely. I think we're all looking for a place on that scale that we feel is right for us, I think. Or rather, and that's part of the problem. Is,
what can we be comfortable with?
Yeah, exactly. What suits us.
Yeah.
Rather than what allows us to be changed. But because we've got a podcast here with a title and a topic, but no answers.
Excellent.
We do need to find something to talk about.
That's true.
So the thing I want to touch on really, what is as I've said, is what when we looked at prayer, we talked about, well, what does the Bible say? What can we sort of infer from what the Bible says about how prayer works? Again, I will do the same with this topic of suffering. What kind of things does the Bible say about it? What can we look at? And even though we can't resolve these questions maybe very easily, or we may find ourselves uncomfortable with where these questions leave us, or use sort of the conclusions we come to, what comfort can we draw? And what hope can we have? What can we be sure of? So that's what we're going to think about. So the first thing we're going to acknowledge that the Bible says, I think, is that God recognises that suffering is part of the world. Okay, I think that's a fairly
that's good. That's a good place to start.
Obvious one. I think the Bible has room in it for our suffering, if that makes sense.
Yes, I think I do understand.
Yeah.
So the idea that it's not just this holy book when everything goes right, and it's not in touch with
that it doesn't acknowledge
reality.
The reality of the human experience. So Psalm 88, could you grab your Bible and flip to Psalm 88?
Yep.
So Psalm 88.
I thought can you recite it for me off by heart? No.
Well, can you?
No, I cannot.
No. Okay, well, I don't need you to recite the whole of Psalm 88 for me, maybe just the last couple of verses. Good, please.
Just the last couple, did you say?
Yeah, just wherever seems like a good place to start reading, towards the end there, and read to the end. Psalm 88.
Okay, right, I'll go from verse 13, if that's okay.
Okay, sounds great.
But I cry to you for help, O Lord. In the morning my prayer comes before you. Why, O Lord, do you reject me and hide your face from me? From my youth I have been afflicted and close to death. I have suffered your terrors and am in despair. Your wrath has swept over me. Your terrors have destroyed me. All day long they surround me like a flood. They have completely engulfed me. You have taken my companions and loved ones from me. The darkness is my closest friend.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm just laughing because it's very morbid.
Yeah, it's a bleak psalm, but that's a lot of the psalms I find they contain some of these elements, but they often end with, I will trust you, or something like this. Psalm 88
Darkness is my closest friend.
That's the way it ends. That's the closing. Yeah. And I think that's
like it.
Yeah, exactly. It's good for us, goths.
That's me.
Yeah.
Great emo.
Yeah, that's right. But I think that certainly when I was younger, that psalm, I enjoyed the fact that psalm was there, if I can put it like that, because it gives you permission, in a sense. There's a psalm with no happy ending. A psalm which just ends with, I'm in despair and I'm not coming out of it.
Is there any happiness in it at all? It is all like I cry out, I cry out.
It's an experience of someone who's struggling. Yeah. But as I said, it doesn't end with, sometimes I think as being a Christian, you're encouraged to get over, you're allowed to be miserable, but
also praise God in the midst of it.
Yeah, exactly. You've got to
still got to put the words out of thanks God for all of it.
Yeah, thanks God for the terrible things that are happening to me. But Psalm 88, I think, gives us permission that it's okay to just come to God and the darkness is my closest friend. It's not you, God, it's the darkness. And that there's room for that in the Bible. And of course, the story of Job,
know that
which
one.
You're familiar with, is a lot of scholars consider it to be the first or the oldest book in the Bible in terms of the story, the narrative. And that's a kind of all about this.
Mm.
How do we respond to suffering?
And that's a very James kind of book, 'cause it doesn't really give an answer. It just
No,
sort
it
of
gives, it
explores the
says lots
emotional
of
depth,
things.
doesn't
Yeah,
it?
it's a
Without.
really quite interesting book. There's a lot of things I'd say about the book of Job. So the Old Testament and the New Testament, the Bible acknowledge that suffering is part of existence and gives space, gives us permission to acknowledge it and to sort of
Feel those emotions,
yeah,
right?
absolutely. That's a good way of putting it. The Bible gives us permission to feel those emotions. One thing that the Bible doesn't seem that interested in is that question that we seem interested in.
Why?
Why? Yeah, why does God allow suffering? Why is there suffering? So the Bible doesn't really address that. I think the Bible does. Why can you think? Do you have any idea why this philosophical debate? Why does God allow suffering? Is not really mentioned.
I didn't have an answer either.
Well,
I don't know.
Maybe, or maybe they felt they did. Maybe they felt, well, look at we've explained that in the first few chapters.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Boom,
That's
sorted.
there, yeah. But
yeah, that's an interesting point.
But there are questions, like in the Old Testament in particular, I won't ask you to look at them. In Jeremiah 12, Job 21, Psalm 73 are all Old Testament references where these ideas come up, which is not why does God allow suffering, but why do the wicked prosper? That is
that's
thing,
more of a question.
Yeah, that comes up. So it's not why is there suffering, but why are the wrong people suffering? That's the question that the Old Testament asks itself a few.
Because we also had the really interesting book of Ecclesiastes, which I think is slightly different. It's not like a lament in the same way, but the idea of meaningless, everything is meaningless. Like the wicked prosper and the good fail, as much as it's vice versa. And there's this kind of element of it's all transient. That's an interesting one. It just kind of again doesn't really answer any questions. It just kind of
and I think those kind of questions, the fact that they're in the Bible and the fact that these people in the Bible are thinking these same things, which is how does this work, God? How can you be sovereign and yet these things be happening and yet you not be anything other than good? It makes no sense. It's kind of it seems random, seems arbitrary. All these questions are there, but there is this kind of this different the question seems to be, well, why is it not more fairly distributed? Don't the bad get bad things and the good get good? That seems to be the big question. But then we get into the New Testament, and what sort of questions do you think of? Any questions the New Testament has about suffering?
I'm not sure about questions. I know that there's kind of a theme of discipline and persecution as two things that needed address, almost like the idea of God disciplining his children. Then also the question of we're persecuted, like how do we respond to that? Which is I suppose slightly different. I don't know, that's probably not what you're thinking of.
No, but that's correct. I mean, I think that there's an interesting shift in the New Testament, maybe because of the genre, it's letters and the Gospels. But these philosophical questions don't really get a look in at all.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yes, yes. Yeah, it's much more how do we apply
absolutely.
Jesus' teaching in line with the Old Testament, like fulfillment, like how do we live this in the age? Yeah.
In his book, The Naming the Silences, Stanley Hauerwas. Are you familiar with him? Yeah.
Yes, I am.
He said Paul, speaking about Paul's attitude to suffering, he said Paul understands suffering not as a metaphysical problem needing a solution, but as a practical challenge requiring a response. And I think that's a good observation, that the New Testament sort of almost isn't interested at all in these questions of why and and how does this work and how does this interact with God's sovereignty. It's almost like, well, look, there's suffering. What do we do about it? How do we live in it as followers of Jesus? And what do we do when we see others suffering? That this becomes the focus of the New Testament.
Is there also a slightly more missional element to it as well? As because I mean, a lot of Paul's letters are concerned with the establishing churches and supporting churches as they grow. And there's obviously Luke Acts is very explains a lot about the mission of the church going out. And I don't know, just thinking like I feel I've not done a study on this, but the passages that I immediately think of to do with suffering in the New Testament, as I said, were often linked to persecution, and almost that idea of we're being persecuted because we're living out the mission, like we are proclaiming Christ loudly, and that's why we're suffering. And it's almost a slightly different slant to the Old Testament in that sense.
Absolutely. There is, I mean, the New Testament takes some different angles on suffering, very interesting. But one of them that you've mentioned is explicitly is that when Paul or Peter or whoever are writing to churches about suffering, a lot of the time the suffering they are facing is persecution. And Paul writes about how to deal with that. In fact, if you could, got your Bible there, if you could flip to 1 Peter chapter 4. So this is Peter who's writing to a church that is explicitly being persecuted, and his response, 1 Peter 4:12-13, if you could.
Yep. Dear friends, do not be surprised at the painful trial you are suffering, as though something strange were happening to you, but rejoice that you participate in the sufferings of Christ, so that you may be overjoyed when his glory is revealed. If you are insulted because of the name of Christ, you are blessed, for the Spirit of glory and of God rests on you.
Okay.
Is that just to 14?
Yeah, that's fine. So that's exactly what you were saying there, that this is a church that's being persecuted. And Peter's response to them is, well, what did you expect? You're trying to follow Christ. But he goes on to say, but the fact you're sharing, this happened to Christ, it's happening to you. You're sharing in Christ's suffering, so you will share in his glory. And this is, I think, a key thing about the New Testament when it talks about suffering, is that when the New Testament talks about suffering, off the top of my head, I can't really think of an example where it divorces this concept, this idea, speaking about suffering as a practical reality, from Christ. Christ is always sort of involved, if you like. He's always
associated with it in some way.
Yes. Either as an example to follow, but I think more than that, there's this sense that the experience of Christ, the story of Christ, has transformed or should transform the way we think about suffering. There's something about Christ's life and death that changes the discussion on suffering. We're no longer talking at all about how can God allow it? Whereas the philosophical, they're totally gone in the New Testament. Something about Christ's life and the cross and the resurrection
just changed the perspective.
Has changed the conversation. It's like there's the Old Testament, I think, is aware of the suffering of humanity and God as the sovereign judge over humanity. The New Testament says, well, God has embraced humanity. He's no longer just the judge. He has embraced humanity in a way we never thought he would. He has become human. He's, totally embraced humanity. And that means he has also totally embraced the experience of human suffering, which we see most evidently on the cross. That is the prime example, and that experience has somehow changed the conversation totally. That God has embraced suffering as well. Like the cross has disarmed suffering. It's shown in a very real way that God is actually at work in suffering. I mean, if you stop and think, God, the creator, the sovereign, however you understand sovereignty, wherever you are on the scale we've talked about, it's a Christian scale. We agree God created the world. It's his. And he set the rules, whatever they are, and that's where we sort of have debates, but he's made the rules and it follows his rules. He has chosen, out of all the things he could do, he's chosen to work and redeem the world through suffering. He's chosen that. That's a bizarre thing.
It is, yeah.
A sort of mind-bending
Yes, I was about to say
concept.
it's big, isn't it? It's a big concept to get your head around.
That God has chosen to save us through suffering. And that has changed the way the New Testament views
suffering.
Of course. The experience of human suffering.
And especially, I suppose, because for a lot of the writers, / all the writers, I guess, because Paul had his conversion vision, didn't he? They knew Christ, like they knew Jesus. I think they had I'm guessing, an emotional connection to Jesus as well in his death, and so they almost experienced it, some of that firsthand. These aren't like, them looking back and at someone they didn't know and didn't have any connection with, and I don't know if I think that probably shapes it as well.
There's an interesting, I think the conversion of Paul's an interesting one, because when Paul meets Jesus on the road to Damascus, he's blinded. If you're familiar with the story, I'm sure.
Done it in Sunday school many times.
Then God speaks to Ananias and tells him to go and pray. And Ananias is reluctant at first because he's heard of Paul. He persecutes the church. But one of the things God says is that, he's my chosen guy. I'm an apostle to the Gentiles, and I will show him how much he must suffer for my name. That's one of the things that God actually says. And there's this sense, I think, in Paul, and that suffering has become, it's not a masochistic thing, or it's not something he views as like abnormal. It's part of his life, because to be Christ-like means to suffer.
Yeah.
Like, it's inevitable. You cannot be Christ-like without experiencing suffering. I think this is Paul's understanding, and the understanding of the New Testament. And when I did my master's dissertation, the question, what I looked at is the idea that suffering was sacramental.
Oh, so a way of experiencing
exactly,
God's grace.
Yeah. So the sacraments, as whichever church tradition we're from, will determine what they are and how many you have, whether you have sort of none, if in Salvation Army, or I think it's 7, I think, for the Roman Catholic Church, typically in many Protestant nonconformist churches, we have communion and baptism as our sacraments. But the sacraments being something, a place where God has agreed to meet human beings. This is kind of, and my argument of my thesis, and I think the argument of the New Testament, is that suffering, you may not want to say it's a sacrament, but it is sacramental in the sense that I think the New Testament does say, look, this is a place where God has agreed to meet his people in suffering. And so whatever the thinking behind, how sovereignty and suffering work, God, I think, has allowed himself to be drawn into human suffering. That's the message of the New Testament. A big question, why does God allow suffering? A bigger question might be, why does God allow himself
to suffer?
To be involved in this thing? That may be a bigger question.
I was just going to say, that's huge.
Yeah.
And no answers to that here,
no,
I'm sure.
That's right. Well...
Or no, am I wrong? You have a cut and dried answer?
No, I don't have a cut and dried answer, but I think...
A few ideas.
I don't know. I don't know why God chose to do it that way. I think the New Testament says, well, this is the way he's chosen to do it. And this should... Because he has exercised his sovereignty in this way, he has... in a sense, not just redeemed humanity, but he's redeemed suffering, in a sense. His potential for suffering to be something redemptive.
Oh, he's redeemed suffering.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that's quite a big statement.
That is a big statement.
I want to think about that before you put that on the back of a book or something with my name next to it. But and I think this is the Peter quote you mentioned, you read out, is the understanding is, look, when we suffer for missional reasons, we're just doing what Christ did. This is exactly what Christ did. It's not something unusual. It's not only is it expected, it's part of our calling. think, to do this.
I have a question that you
you
may well be coming to.
Well,
but
let's ask and find out.
But that's quite a key, I would say, distinction, though, isn't it? When we suffer for missional causes, right? Because actually, a lot of the times I suffer in my very comfortable Western, UK, which is, Christianity is not persecuted here. That actually, my suffering.
Yeah.
Sorry, my suffering is not often linked to mission.
Yeah,
in my head,
right.
anyway. I don't know if you're going to come back at me with some.
I think
deeper thought, but crashing my car or breaking my leg, or someone I love being very, very ill doesn't seem to me in quite the same categories as what the early church are experiencing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we will, maybe I was selling myself a bit short. We will maybe think about some of the factors, but we'll go on to that. But yeah, I think
we can park that.
You're quite right. There are lots of reasons why people suffer, and the Bible does think about some of those. We'll look at them. But on the other, I think this idea of sharing in Christ's sufferings. So I would argue that any suffering you experience as a result of your obedience to Christ, even if it's not explicitly missional, because you're being persecuted, would, count as that. And as it says in Romans, if we share in Christ's sufferings, we will share in his glory. So I think there's a broadness to the idea of Christ's suffering.
Okay.
Because why did Christ suffer? Not just, because he was persecuted and crucified, but he was rejected, he was misunderstood, he went without things, without possessions, he didn't have a home. He went
hungry at certain points. Yeah.
All these things because he was being obedient to God.
Okay.
So I would say that sharing in Christ's sufferings is perhaps a bit broader than being persecuted for mission. Okay. But you are right that there are reasons we suffer that have nothing to do with obedience to God. I mean, the most obvious, you've maybe not crashing your car, but human action, like as a result of sin. Yeah. We suffer because of sin. There are examples of that in the Bible. Can you think of any off the top of your head?
Someone suffering
because as a result of their sin.
My mind's gone completely blank.
Fine.
I was just trying to think of who sins. People suffering as a result of their sin.
Yeah.
As in the human consequence. Because I can think of lots of examples, particularly in the prophets, where God says, I'm going to allow punishment to happen, or allow these nations to invade and for there to be famine and suffering because you have not been faithful to me.
Exactly. So there is, there's stories in quite a few in the Old Testament of, I think, of the times in the wilderness. There are various times where people, all kinds of things. When you'd see in David's reign, when he decides he wants to take a census, and then the plague sweeps through the land. So in that, because of his pride in trying to count his men, so in that case, other people are suffering because of David's sin, the king's sin. In the plagues in Exodus 7, for example, and these are things that God is directly behind, directly attributing.
I'm just smiling because the 10 plagues and that story is one that we often used to teach in kids' church. Yeah. It's quite a engaging narrative.
Yes, absolutely.
The kids like it, and yet it's really hard to teach because how do you teach children about lots
difficult.
Of people suffering?
Yeah.
Lots of it was often the Egyptian people suffering because of the work of their pharaoh. But sorry. So that's was just my little thought to myself there.
There's sometimes we do suffer as a result of our own actions, or we suffer as a result of other people's actions.
Yes, control over. I was thinking of when you first said it was Cain and Abel. Obviously, Cain killing Abel. I mean, Abel obviously suffers because he dies, and that's got he did nothing wrong as far as I'm aware.
Quite the opposite.
Exactly. He did it right, didn't he? That was the problem.
He did it right, and that's what got him killed. So, so there there are plenty of examples of people suffering because of action, basically. And sometimes that's kind of linked to being obedient, such as, if you suffer, if you're persecuted, you are suffering because of someone's actions. But you're doing the right thing. There's almost a throwaway line in the Gospel of Luke, Luke 13, where Jesus heals a woman with heals her back, and he's criticized for healing on the Sabbath, and so on. And one of the things he says, should I not, you do this for, you'd be kind, should I not do this for a daughter of Israel whom Satan has held in bondage for, I think it's 30 years or 13 years, or I can't. But that's Luke 13:16 if you want to check that. But there's this idea there, Jesus saying, well, actually, this is a spiritual. Yeah. This woman is suffering because of a spiritual ailment, like a spiritual warfare.
Yeah. That the devil is.
Yeah. So
is
in
that
some
a fair
way
comment? Like to say Satan is a work of evil causing suffering.
Yeah, and I think Job again touches on that idea of what's God and what's the devil, and is it the same? God's allowing, is that the same as God actively?
Yes, because God can't, I want to say perpetrate, I'm not even sure if that's the right use of the word, but he can't
be evil.
Evil.
Yeah.
But he can allow it to happen. That seems like kind of a loophole.
Yeah, but, exactly. This is the problem with why you can never quite get a satisfactory answer, because it doesn't sound, it's, as you say, someone might say, well, hang on, isn't that the same thing? But anyway, there's another example, though, of that suffering because of what God allows, in a sense, is Paul's experiences in 2 Corinthians 10.
Yeah, I wondered if you're going to bring 2 Corinthians up. Yeah.
Is that where he says... so he's talking about someone who's experienced visions of wonderful things not permitted to tell, who a lot of scholars think it's Paul. He's talking about himself, because he then goes on to say, because of these surpassingly great revelations, there was given me a thorn in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. So
I've never picked up on the messenger of Satan part. That's really interesting.
Regards this as not as something that's from... It's weird because he says, to keep me from becoming conceited. So that sounds like something God would do, teaching him humility. But it's a messenger of Satan. So from Paul's perspective, God has allowed...
Yes, the evilness is coming from Satan, but God has allowed it to happen in order to
because then he goes on to say, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it from me, but he replied, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness.
And that is interesting, because I thought you were going to bring up 2 Corinthians, because you've got the whole long list of Paul's like, I've been shipwrecked, I've been abused, I've suffered in all these different ways. And his point is not to brag about that. But I find it interesting that he makes a distinction, but that's not the thorn in his flesh. He's been given a specific thorn in his flesh. Like, it's not... I don't know, there's almost 2 different kinds of suffering in it, in a way.
Yeah, this is something he... Like the shipwreck, persecution, all that. That's just
part and parcel of being a
normal
Christian.
Day. Yeah, that's my life, says Paul. That's what I get for following Jesus. But the thorn in the flesh seems to be
something quite specific.
Specific right? He's referring to, and there's been discussions over what that is.
I've heard a few interesting ones. Yeah,
that's right. But the idea, the thing those 2 things have in common, though, different. One is, this is what you get following Jesus, and the other is, this is a messenger of Satan. But in both of those, Paul sees God
at work. Right. Mm-hmm.
God's the second one, which may be more, as you said earlier, not all our suffering, or very little of our suffering, we may feel is to do with being obedient. But these messengers of Satan, these things we have to live with, where God says, this is God saying it, this is not Paul saying it, my power is made perfect in weakness. So there's something, I don't know, it feels to me like it's more than God just saying, I can do more through someone who's a bit humble. it feels to me like God's almost saying, no, actually, weakness unlocks my power in some way, that it wouldn't otherwise. If you didn't need this thorn in the flesh, you wouldn't have as much of an experience of my power. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. I guess, and this is perhaps maybe more of a slightly like, I don't know, like, how do we apply theology?
Yeah.
Maybe it's a bit broad, but I guess my question would be, the theory sounds really good, right? But how do we approach someone who is just suffering?
Yeah.
And it's, we all know of an awful situation where it's just really hard to see the good.
Right.
Or, there are times when I've gone through things that I've found really hard and I've been like, I just feel weak. Like, I can't even see how God is ever going to use that situation.
Yeah.
And it's almost like it's denting my faith rather than drawing me close. Like, how do we...
Yeah.
I guess the question is, how do we not beat ourselves up about having those kind of experiences whilst also holding to the truth that,
Yeah, okay. Well,
of how we're supposed to approach suffering.
It's not easy. And I think I'm always very conscious when I talk about this. Like you say, it's a good theory. But people and you just feel like, well, I can't say that to them because it sounds so glib, it sounds so trite. So there's a lot to say. I think for one thing, I don't think we should beat ourselves up about these things like Psalm 88.
Yeah,
that's right. There's no
darkness is my
positivity
only friend
there, but it's like God saying, no, I know there are times where it feels like that is your reality, and that's okay. There's a psalm in there about that. I think one of the things about, what is it that, here's a question for you. What is it that makes baptism and not just someone being dunked in water? Or what is it that makes communion and not just eating a bit of bread and a cup of grape juice or what?
That's a really good question.
Yeah, it's something.
I mean, do you specifically, this isn't like a hypothetical, like
it's
a rhetorical
not really
question.
A hypothetical.
You want an actual...
What is it? What is it that makes it meaningful to you, I suppose?
Well, I guess it's what it represents, what it means.
Yeah.
From like it's what it points to.
Yeah.
And that reminder of Christ's death and resurrection, and a reminder that I fit into, that I've been drawn into that story.
Yeah, absolutely. From the there's been lots of discussion on the sacraments and writing all the way back from Augustine and in those first few centuries. But one of the key themes has always been this, exactly as you said. It's been faith. It's been you're not just doing something; you are believing. You're holding on to something as you do it.
Yeah, there's a real meaning.
It's pointing to something else.
Yeah.
And I think it is always difficult to experience God in anything without that hope, without that faith. I mean, the New Testament, if you think it's difficult sort of thinking about some of these things, the New Testament, like in 2 Corinthians 12, as I mentioned, James, the first couple of verses of the book of James, Romans 5 verse 3, all, when they're talking about suffering, they all say that some suffering is something we should rejoice in. We should be joyful in suffering.
That makes me so grumpy when I'm, suffering, and I'm like, I don't want to rejoice in this.
Exactly. And that's kind of, if you think, you try that, you try going to someone who's really suffering and say, well, you know what, you should rejoice.
The Bible tells us to rejoice
in your sufferings.
Come on.
But that comes from a position of faith, if you like, that there's something else happening. There's more going on here than what we can just see and experience.
Yes. Yeah. A wider
narrative,
or, that wider understanding of Christ. And again, centering it back in Christ. Or
I mean, even The Colossians, one thing I think of, again, Paul, the way Paul thinks about suffering is very interesting. In Colossians 1, I think it's verse 24, that's what I've got written down, is this idea. He says something like, and I rejoice in what was suffered for you, and I fill up in my flesh what is lacking in regard to Christ's afflictions for the sake of his body, which is the church. And it's his way of saying, look, I've suffered. I've had to make, Christ died for you, but I'm the one who's had to suffer to bring the faith to you, to see you grow. I rejoice
in it.
In that. I see it as having value. And again, those are sufferings that are coming out of a decision to serve God. But he's just got this way of thinking about suffering that I think is totally different to the way we naturally think about it.
And I just want to, I'm fairly certain I know the answer here, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Yeah, go ahead.
And we are we're this isn't just like Paul's personality that he just, because some people suffering doesn't get to them that much, they can just keep going. Yeah. We're very much, or you'd very much argue that this is the Holy Spirit in Paul. This is an act of his result of his conversion.
Yeah, I think so. I think Paul has an understanding from as his life has changed, and that has given him a different perspective. And and I think he's learned. You learn, and unfortunately, sometimes lessons are painful, I think. But if you've learned from them, then they're not pointless.
That's fair.
Yeah, but so. Well, maybe, look, we've talked about something, and the Bible does actually say a lot about suffering, as in there are countless, not literally, but
I'm sure someone has
loads
counted them,
of passages that talk about people's experiences of suffering, stories of suffering in the Bible, people who suffer. There are passages about how we're to respond to suffering. I think, but with this question of when I talked about prayer with Oz, one of the things I was talking about was that there are a lot of factors in play as to whether prayer is answered or not, and we don't necessarily know all the factors.
Yeah,
and I think it's the same with suffering. I think there's a lot of things we don't know about going on behind the scenes or leading up to this point. And prayer might be one of those factors. Prayer may or may not
cause suffering.
No, relieve suffering.
Yeah.
So, that's an encouragement to pray. And the fact is, wherever we are on that spectrum, determinists would say there is an unknowable will of wisdom of God behind this thing that's happening.
Yeah.
The open theists say, well, it's exactly the same. It's just that they've got hundreds of unknowable factors that led to this point. Like, for example, if someone gets a diagnosis of cancer, the determinist would say, well, there's an unknowable purpose in God's wisdom behind this happening. And the open theist would say, well, what caused it? Hundreds of unknowable, your diet, your genetics.
Yeah.
We just don't know. What caused it, but there are causes behind it.
Yeah, and God allowed it to happen, but he didn't necessarily decide, that person's going to get cancer.
But both of them are saying, we don't know, really. There's something unknowable.
Okay, I see.
Yeah, there's something unknowable. There's something unknowable behind how this happened. Whether it's the will of God or all the, billions of causes that led to this effect. And I think, unfortunately, that's where we end up. So that's why I think it's good to actually say, well, this is the reality. What does the Bible say about how we cope with this reality? What will we see in this? Where's the hope? What is God doing in the middle of it? Not, whoever caused it, wherever it came from, what is God doing right now in that?
Wow. Lots of food for thought.
Yeah, and again, no real answers. Hopefully, maybe some encouragement somewhere for someone.
Have you, just out of interest, and maybe to end on a slightly lighter note, have you given any answers in any of these
I've
three
tried
podcasts.
to avoid
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
So well done. That's quite
Yeah.
impressive.
The answers just get you into trouble.
Yeah, because then often, sometimes you get the answers wrong and you have to go back and be like, I was wrong, whereas this way.
Exactly. And
Never
no
wrong.
one can accuse you of being a false teacher if you never teach anything. That's the way.
That is the takeaway message from this podcast. No, jokes aside, that was really interesting and yeah, absolutely fascinating. Yeah, topic.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I hope this has been helpful for everyone who's listening and watching. And if you do have extra questions that haven't been answered, please do email James and send them his way. But
as long as you don't expect an answer, I think we've established that I'd have an answer questions.
It'll all be fine. But yeah, that's all from us. Hope you have a brilliant rest of your day. God bless.